Hey friends, today we're gonna talk about claymorphism in user interfaces. There is a new design trend emerging, and this time it's also stepping outside of the UI world and into the art space. Hello claymorphism. We'll get to the defining traits and features of this style in a minute. Before we do, we need to address the neumorphic elephant in the room. It's gonna be depth reimagined again. Let me start with the obvious. For reasons I stated in the very first article, neumorphism didn't really take off. I don't think the biggest issue with it was accessibility, as it could be made accessible within a few tweaks. No, the big issue was that it was simply visually boring in most of the examples. To achieve a level of fidelity that would compensate for that, it would require a lot of artistic skills and almost impossible front-end capabilities. It had, however, a group of very strong supporters in the dev community, and some products were actually built using that style, for better or for worse. Designers were increasingly becoming bored with the typical flat layered designs on most products. It seemed like people wanted more depth, even if fake, but not necessarily done in the way Neumorphism tried it. Since the early days of flat displays, we tried to simulate depth on them. That high level of skeuomorphic approach helps us better process what we're looking at, while also being more friendly, organic, and simply human. With the advent of metaverses and rising popularity of NFTs, the 3D scene exploded. Tools like Spline also democratized the landscape the way Sketch did when all designers worked in Photoshop. 3D became hip and trendy on its own. But one particular style of 3D seems to be gaining popularity, often mixed with otherwise minimal designs. I call it fluffy 3D. The first time I noticed it go mainstream was when the startup pitch used it as their cute key visuals. Since then, people like Amrit Balsing, Sam Briscoe, the folks at Icons 8, and others explored this style, pushing it further through artwork, UI assets, and iconography. This particular style got so beloved by people all over the world that it spawned a whole other artistic endeavor in the NFT space. Both Amrit's friendly faces and many other art styles got transformed into fluffy 3D and generated millions of dollars in revenue for the artists. Fluffy 3D fit quite well in the otherwise minimalist design world, but one by one those flat surfaces began to inflate a little to match the style of the graphics. The best way to think about it is if you simply inflated your neumorphic shapes. Instead of mostly flat surfaces with a little concave, they're now 3D dome-like structures, very round, very three-dimensional, and soft. In one of my larger UI studies back in 2015, we actually tested a fluffy 3D button against other options, and it annihilated the competition among general population. Only in the tech-savvy group it wasn't the main preference. The friendliness of these shapes, along with the 3D imagery, creates a slightly childlike interface. To counter it, it's good to use minimal typography, strong accent colors, and good contrast. It's not really possible to achieve in CSS just yet, but some clever developers are already working on modifiable SVGs, so it's only a matter of time when it can get coded. Similarly to neumorphism, claymorphism is also a combination of inner and outer shadows. However, the depth against the background is only done using one larger shadow, often also moved along the x-axis a little, which breaks a lot of the conventional UI shadow rules. The effect itself is achieved using two inner shadows that give it that clay-like 3D look. The top left inner shadow has to be slightly lighter, while the bottom right inner shadow has to be a little bit darker. That gives us a lot more flexibility with styling and allows us to use it on various background types. Okay, let's talk about the shapes. It always starts with a rectangle or a square. Then the next step is rounding the corners, usually beyond 50% of the roundness possible for the size of your rectangle. Then we use the path tool to add additional points exactly in the middle of each side of the rectangle. Switch them to mirror style handles and drag them outwards. As an example, the top point will go to the top, bending the top edge and making it slightly curved. Now, if your edge is forming a sharp corner with just two straight lines like that, you must switch it to the mirror option and then drag the handles out to both sides. Claymorphism also works in dark mode, but only when the shape itself isn't completely black. As with Neumorphism, we need to be able to see the inner shadows against the background for the effect to work. That's pretty simple, right? As Glassmorphism has now become one of the cornerstones of mainstream modern UI design, it can be merged with Claymorphism as well, for quite interesting results. Adding a delicate inner shadow to a fluffy Glassmorphic panel works and can look interesting and fresh when done right. Both virtual and augmented reality are likely here to stay, whether it's the rumored Apple glasses or Facebook metaverse. There will be more interfaces that are right before our eyes. The benefit of Claymorphism is that it's tangible. The fake 3D effect allows for much faster processing of the panels and buttons by our brains. That's because they look almost real. A scenario that's perfect for all kinds of realities, both augmented and virtual. Of course, with real 3D, the effect won't have to be simulated, as the panels could simply be real 3D objects. Okay, conclusion. Claymorphic 3D has been on my radar for a while, with growing popularity of both easier to use amazing 3D tools and possible mindset shift among the general population. With a rather gloomy worldwide situation, we may want to relive our childhood moments a little bit, where everything was a little fluffy and inflated. Maybe after so many meetings, workshops and discussions, we don't want our interfaces to be as serious as they used to be. Utilitarian minimalism has its uses, but it seems like the consumers want their interfaces to be more friendly.